Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Even Tacos Fall Apart. I'm MommaFoxFire, and as always, I am so glad you're here listening today. Whether you're tuning in for the first time, or you've been here following along with the show for a while, this is a space where we have real conversations about mental health, chronic illness, and navigating life's tougher moments. We keep it raw and unfiltered because life doesn't come with a script. It's messy, unpredictable, and sometimes you've just got to sit with it and figure out how to move forward. So if you're here for honest discussions and real stories, you are in the right place. Today, we're diving into something pretty cool, and that's how tabletop role-playing games can help reframe how you see yourself and how they can be a powerful tool when you're living with chronic illness. These games allow people to explore different parts of themselves, try on new identities, and face challenges in a way that feels safe, controlled, and surprisingly therapeutic. When you're living with chronic pain or illness, the way you see yourself can get pretty twisted. Your body might not be doing what you want it to do. Your mind might be playing tricks on you. You might feel isolated, like nobody really gets it. And that's where tabletop role-playing games can come in. You get to step outside of your daily life, outside of all the limitations that come with your health struggles, and you get to be someone else for a while. Someone strong, someone who can tackle challenges head on, or maybe even someone who's just figuring it out like the rest of us. The best part is that you don't have to do it alone. These games are collaborative. You play with others, you build stories together, and through that you create a sense of community and connection. I know for a lot of people, especially those dealing with chronic conditions, feeling like you're part of something bigger, feeling seen, and finding ways to navigate emotions in a healthy way can make a huge difference. Tabletop role-playing games can help with that. They're more than just entertainment. They're a space for reflection, learning, and sometimes even healing. My guests today, Nate Lindberg and Conrad Audette, know this firsthand. Both of them have deep personal experiences with chronic illness and mental health. And they've used role-playing games not just as a way to escape, but as a way to reconnect with themselves and others. They've even built an entire community around the idea that these games can be a tool for understanding who we are and how we deal with life's toughest moments. This episode isn't about finding a magical solution to chronic illness or mental health struggles. I know there isn't a quick fix, but it is about offering a different perspective, maybe showing you a tool you haven't thought of before that could help you get through the day, the week, or even just a tough moment. So as you listen to this episode, I would love for you to think about how you're showing up for yourself in your own life. Are there ways you can challenge the way you see yourself? Are there tools you haven't explored that might offer some relief, some understanding, or just a new way to connect with others? I'd also love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever used a game to cope with something tough? Did it help? Let me know. You can reach out to me on social media. I'm MommaFoxFire everywhere, or leave a comment wherever you're listening. I'm always eager to hear how you're doing and what's working for you. Before we dive into the interview portion, I want to mention that this episode was originally recorded back in 2021. It's been 3 years, but everything we talked about is still just as relevant today. The struggles that come with chronic illness, mental health, and finding ways to cope don't change that much over time. The tools we discuss, like tabletop role-playing games, for self-understanding and connection, are just as impactful now as they were then. So whether you're new to this topic or revisiting it from our original conversation, I'm confident there's something here for you. Enough from me for now. Let's get into the interview with Nate and Conrad. They've got some great insights on how tabletop role-playing games can be a lifeline when you're feeling lost or stuck. Stay tuned because I think this is going to resonate with a lot of you. Welcome, everybody, to another Mental Health Monday. I'm really excited for tonight's conversation. I have some great guests here. We're going to be talking about using tabletop RPGs to reframe self-understanding and as a tool when facing chronic illness. And with me today, I have Conrad, Audette, and Nate Lindberg. You'll notice a couple of weird things going on my screen. I would like you to ignore them, and we're not gonna talk about it. It is what it is. And as usual, I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties, and that is okay. We're just gonna pretend it's not happening. But thank you guys so much for joining us. I'm gonna throw out some links here in just a second. But a little bit about Nate and about Conrad. Nate Lindberg is a podcaster, columnist, content creator, IT professional, which I need, and a lifelong technology buff, wrestling nerd, and gamer. Together with his childhood friend of 23 years, Nate is the co-creator of Dungeons and Dragons, a weekly YouTube series that highlights the use of tabletop RPGs and how they can be used in a directed therapeutic manner. He is also the host of the DJcast, a supplemental podcast to Dungeons and Dragons. Nate and his co-hosts dive deeper into RPG gaming and therapy, conduct interviews with tabletop RPG developers, and more when he is not being a deej or degenerate, which I absolutely love. Nate is an analyst with the Pro Wrestling Torch, one of the oldest pro wrestling journalism entities in existence, which is really cool. And to pay the bills, he fixes computers for a living. I'm just going to ship you mine, and we're going to see what you can do with it. You'll open it up and cry at all the spaghetti. A lifetime lover of audio. Sounds a bit off. Right, I'm having so much trouble with my audio. Maybe you can help me with it at some point. A lifetime lover of psychology, Conrad graduated with distinction, receiving a master's degree in counseling psychology. While working in the field as a crisis clinician, GI autoimmune disease interrupted every aspect of his life. After years of hospitalizations, 3 major surgeries, abdominal nerve damage, and a still ongoing search for effective treatment, Conrad kept his sanity through tabletop RPGs, which I'm really excited to talk about tonight. Using role-playing as a means of redefining strength, sense of self-worth, and purpose, he was able to find a positive outlook. Knowing the value and impact of RPGs, Conrad approached his friend of 20 plus years, Nate Lindberg, and created a show together to share the power of RPGs. And now Dungeons and Dragons educates how to play indie tabletop games and discusses their therapeutic benefits. I have socials. I have more info. Hang on, I've got the links. But gentlemen, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, thank you for having us.
Appreciate it. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure everything is set right there. I think the right people are speaking and it's showing up underneath your heads, so we should be good. Yes, but the audio issues are related to RTX, which is now NVIDIA broadcast, which is screwing me over big time, and I don't know how to fix it, and I need you and your lovely husband to come over at some point and help me. So as we dig right in here, can you each tell us a little bit more about what made you become interested in specializing in the ties between mental health and gaming?
Sure, we'll let Conrad start, and I'll jump in after.
Sounds good. So I'd say that it really began right when I first learned role-playing at the beginning of undergrad. And I was taught by theater people, philosophy majors, and English majors. And so they were really focused on story and the human condition, and moved more away from numbers and combat. And I was so excited about it that I brought it back to my dorm and have you guys played? And then it got to the point where the entire dorm was in on this just giant game. There were 60 people involved in this one ongoing story. And it was 10 people at a time. And it was just so bonkers having all of these people involved. But it created this real sense of unity, and all these new relationships formed. And you could even see just social skills building. Because I was in the substance-free housing my freshman year, and particularly nerdy people are in the substance-free housing. At least that's how it was where I went. Yeah, all of these like really quiet people were verbalizing and getting in on this, and I right from there could see just like the power it had, and it over time certainly it started having all of these other benefits that we could see, and especially for myself as a person. I don't know if I would. Nate, what do you like? Jump in now, so I just spewed there.
Sure. No, so basically, I was not really into RPG gaming at all growing up. Even when Conrad started to kind of dive into it a little bit in college, of course, Conrad and I have known each other since fourth grade. So he came back to our group of friends with it, and he started to play a little bit. But because of all of the the books and the rules and all of that, it was really hard for me. I'm an ADD kid. It's really hard for me to get into it and dive into it and let it retain in my brain. So it wasn't until really years later when Conrad approached me about doing the show where even the thought of therapeutic gaming even kind of approached my brain. He started talking to me a little bit about it, and it really started to make sense to me. I don't have a psychology background or anything like that, though I am like therapy minded and psychology minded. But everything seemed to make sense to me, and through doing the show, I've learned quite a bit about it through just through Conrad, but also through the people we've met, different connections we've met, and things like that. Mostly, I do this to kind of help Conrad and make Conrad's dream a reality. Is kind of my big thing for doing it. Just kind of hang out with my friends and do something cool. So that's why I'm here.
That's really cool. It's really neat just to see the support that you have for a friend. And then what you said about the books and like the rules and everything, really, that's one of the reasons that I didn't get into D&D in particular when I was a kid. I mean, I didn't get into it until very recently when my sister, who is very, very into it and knows all of the rules and everything, we started playing together, and she's like, I can tell you exactly what you need to do. If you ask me a question, I can answer it, and I can tell you what book to look in. And she has all the books and everything. So unless you have that knowledge or someone with that knowledge, it is really difficult to absorb everything and then put it into place. So
Absolutely. And even now, I still gravitate towards games that aren't quite as crunchy. Things like Kids on Bikes or something like that. So.
Yeah.
So that's like in our very first trailer for the show is Nate dropping this like all these books being like
No, well you drop a stack of books in front of
books,
me
yeah.
and you're like, yeah.
And I'm like, isn't this cool? And
He's like, have you ever heard of gaming?
Yeah,
no, that's too much.
Yeah. But yeah,
but
oh my gosh.
that's really kind of part of what we do. That's kind of part of what we do, and we'll get into it, I guess, a little bit more down the road. But it is part of the show is learning through me. Conrad teaches me how to play the game, and kind of through that, like I have no idea what the rules are going into the games or anything like that. Neither do the majority of the players unless they've played the game before. So we kind of everybody learns through me through it. So that's kind of what it's for. Is designed for people that may not be able to sit down or don't have the desire to sit down with all these books, but still kind of get an idea how to play.
Yeah. That's really neat. Go ahead.
Yeah, so like we really believe that everybody can benefit from it, and that it's really daunting having all of these different rules, and it's going from one game to another. There's different rules. So even if you learn all the rules for one game, then you go to the left, and it's like a whole other 300-page book I have to read. So
right.
That is part of it. And so we want to make it more accessible from that standpoint, where we create this kind of authentic learning experience where the players are being taught the game. So as they're playing, if they don't understand something, then probably the viewer doesn't understand it either, as opposed to, just kind of assume we know everything and just move on, or we try to fake it. You don't know which one is not going to be clear. So that's one of the aspects of the show, to make it so that whoever is watching can learn it.
Yeah. Well,
Exactly.
and it's the teach a kid how to do it. If you can't teach it to a fifth grader, you're going over too many people's heads.
Mm-hmm.
So, so Byte, I switched my mic to just this instead of the NVIDIA broadcast. Let me know if that's better, please. You'll probably hear the cicadas outside though, because it doesn't have the filtering. Okay, way better. All right, so it's just NVIDIA can.
Yeah, it's a lot better.
All right, good. So what are some of y'all's favorite hobbies? And do you feel there are any distinctions between what you consider hobbies and self-care?
Jump in. No wrestling.
Sure, why not? So one of my biggest things is pro wrestling. I've been a pro wrestling nerd since I was, like 8. I think it's something else Conrad probably introduced me to way back in the day. But yeah, it's something I've really been passionate about for a long time. I've got a couple friends in the business, and I started doing some freelance like writing for the Pro Wrestling Torch, pwtorch.com, which turned into doing some podcasting for pwtorch.com. So I actually do a live call-in podcast every Tuesday night for PW Torch called PWT Talks NXT. We go live at about 10:30 EST after NXT, which is WWE's like developmental show where they have all the new upcoming talent. We go live, take people's calls and emails and things like that. So I kind of do a lot on that. The other thing is my hobby is the show. I do all of the graphic design. I do the music, the editing, the filming. If it's technical, it's me. My roommate Tony does help me with some of it here and there, but for the most part, it's all me. So that's kind of largely what I've been spending my past 2 years doing. It's kind of editing the show and things like that. But one thing that I do kind of where my hobbies have kind of almost become work in a way. I do try to take some time to what we like to call Deej time. Is our brand name, Deeges and Dragons being the show. But I like to take some Deej time for myself. Deej time, just take some time out of the day and whether it be play video games with, a buddy of mine or, take a walk or something like that. Just something that's kind of either out of the norm or whatever to get your mind out of what you're doing. So I think there is definitely, at least for me anyway, definitely some differentiation between my hobbies and then kind of unwinding and self-care.
One of the hobbies.
Conrad, I think you're muted. Oh, never mind. Sorry.
I was just delayed. So, yeah, one of my hobbies that I do share with Nate is Magic: The Gathering. It's another game that we've been playing for a long time. I really got into it in 04, 05, but had played previously, but didn't actually know the rules. So, like, we just kind of like made stuff up. Like, oh, trample. I can't remember what we thought trample meant, like, in 2000, but it wasn't what it was. None of them were. So it was kind of funny getting back into it or / into it for the first time in 04, 05 and going to like the local game store and getting absolutely obliterated because I just didn't know what was going on. It's like, oh, this means this? Okay. But it's a pretty big passion where even if I'm not playing, like it's something that I like to think about, like just deck teching, like combos and stuff. It's just kind of like brain exercises almost at this point. But I'd say that's a big one. And I do some gaming for video games. We basically really just play Smite. And that one, it's I don't know if everyone's familiar with that, but it's a MOBA for people who didn't play MOBAs. And because I never got into any others, and the big pull here was, well, one, friends were playing it, but two, just because it's all about gods, and that's always been another interest, like folklore and just the different pantheons and that sort of like what it meant to cultures across time. So all of that just was like, oh, all right, cool. And every time they add a new one, you know, like they just added like Morgan Le Fay, and before that they added Gilgamesh, and it's just cool, like seeing these tales brought to life in this way, and then getting to emulate these characters. And I guess the other one would probably be singing, that I like still keep up doing, and I would love to actually get back into a choir at some point. It's something that I found at the end of high school, and then I ended up in 3 choirs for a while, and now I'm in none, but I still sing every day, and it's a largely positive thing for me. So,
well, I also sing every day, but not in any sort of great fashion. But it brings me a lot of joy.
Yeah, I'm right there with
Whether I'm good at it or not, it brings me a lot of joy, especially when my children roll their eyes at me. So that's a bonus.
yeah, and you don't have to be good at it. Like,
Yeah.
the neuropsych of it is like anybody who sings for like 15 minutes a day is going to feel better, regardless. Doesn't matter the quote unquote quality. It's just like that experience.
I'm gonna clip this and I'm gonna put it on my phone, and just every time they complain about it, I'm like, quality doesn't matter. Quality doesn't matter. Quality doesn't matter.
That's right. You can exactly say that for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, do you each have a serial killer or true crime story that fascinates you?
Yes.
Sure, I do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead.
All right, sure. So, as I previously stated, I'm a giant pro wrestling nerd. So this one, there's really 2, and I was kind of debating on which one to talk about. But the one that I'll talk about is the whole thing revolving around Chris Benoit in 2007. I don't know if anybody necessarily. I know Conrad knows what I'm talking about, but Chris Benoit was a professional wrestler who was pretty much at the peak of his career at the time. Current, I think he was champion in WWE at around this particular time as well. But he he was always like a really nice guy. Everybody had great things to say about him. And one day he kind of didn't show up for work. Didn't show up for a televised match, and it was a big match. It was a pay-per-view event. And as kind of things started to unfold through that night, they found out that his wife, and his son were all dead. Turns out that he actually murdered his wife and son over the course of this weekend, and it was like this big, long, drawn-out thing. I won't get into details and things like that for, so I didn't necessarily give a content warning or anything, but yeah, so there's a lot that revolved around that, and what happened, why he snapped, and what went through his brain. That because even his best friends are like, this is something we would never expect him to do. It would be like the equivalent of like me and Conrad and like our group of friends, one of us just going and snapping in terms of what that was there. And it kind of comes down to a lot of CTE and concussion trauma issues that he sustained through the course of his wrestling career. But there's a lot of mystery and intrigue of what exactly happened, what caused him to snap. Did he snap? Was it steroids? And there's a whole, I could sit here and talk about it all night, but that's kind of the basic gist of it. But you start to deep dive into it, and you start to get into like some of the CTE issues, especially with wrestlers of that generation and older, and early deaths and things like that, and it kind of just snowballs from there. But it's certainly fascinating, interesting once you kind of dive into it.
Yeah, and we've got a comment in the chat says, so glad people are talking about CTE from contact sports. And that's definitely, so you started talking about that, and I do remember that. I think I remember that actually happening because it was such a, it was major news.
Like mainstream news.
Right, yeah. And because I don't follow, I don't have anything against wrestling, but I don't follow wrestling. But I remember that being in the news.
Yeah, it was a big thing, and it was like headlines for weeks. It was a big thing.
Yeah, definitely. Go ahead.
This was a tough one for me to narrow down, and it's like my first elective psychology class was actually psychology of deviance, and so it's like basically anything that played a role in forming the behavioral analysis unit with the FBI was incredibly fascinating. But I think I'm going to hone in on the Unabomber, and what I was really, his whole story is just interesting to me, where he started off as this, well, I guess he was always just this math prodigy, and so it's like very intelligent person who ended up over at Harvard, and while he was there, he was part of this experiment that he didn't really know like what the experiment was, and there's some debate whether or not that it was related to like the CIA's program attempting mind control. But what they would do is have you write out these like lengthy thoughts on life, and then they would use it as ammunition to abuse you. And that went on for like, he was in this experiment where this happened over 200 hours. And he's just like, you know, this young impressionable mind at Harvard, where he's like, oh, I have all these ideas, and just constantly having them thrown in his face and then belittled because of them. And then he went on to live in solitude in the middle of Montana. And while he was there, that's when he started creating his bombs and whatnot. But it was part of it. He's like, I am struggling to live in solitude, one with nature and away from all these people, because of the advancement of technology and the deconstruction of the forest. And so he thought, again, that what he was doing was for the sake of humanity. But what's so interesting to me about it is I have to wonder did everything that happened, you took this like really great mathematical mind that could have done a lot aside from go into a life of solitude and then harm and kill people. But if this whole psychological experiment and sorry, stumbling over my own words. But if the use of these psychological experiments too, if they caused him to do these things, and so we have to not only be careful with, what we use in our experiments. It kind of was, because this was decades ago, and it was really like right before, like, we should probably have some more control measures for experiments so that the participants aren't harmed. And I know like the Stanford prison experiment is like the big one that gets talked about for that, but there are lots of other ones too out there that people were seriously damaged, that now hopefully we're going about things in a safe way. And so
that both of those have just backstories and things around your brain, right? Whether it's concussions and how that impacts your frame of mind, or experimentation and different things, and even solitude. I think there's some stuff in there with the Unabomber in particular and how that impacts you. But that's always something that is interesting. since I started asking this question, and this question came about on accident, like this wasn't a question that I just started randomly asking people. I think on the very first show that I did, because I'm pretty sure it was B. I'm pretty sure B is the one. Somehow serial killers came up and the psychology kind of behind that. And she was like, yeah, you should ask your next guest if they have a serial killer fascination. And it's never stopped. It's never stopped, because even if someone isn't fascinated by serial killers, it's like there's always a true crime story that someone has heard about, that someone lives through, that someone, you know, is interested in. And the psych behind the mind is really interesting.
You get a lot of repeats?
Actually, no. I don't even think we've had the Unabomber before, which is shocking. Like that's a big one, right? And we haven't had that one before, I don't think. There was one. So someone's talked about Ed Kemper before, but you didn't talk about him, so that's not a repeat. We were talking about it. We were talking about that before, so it doesn't count. But yeah, it's all over the place. Unabomber is a good one, and I'm surprised we haven't had that one before. I need to come up with a montage of all the different ones, just to make sure that there's not a repeat so far, but I don't think that there is.
That in itself is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah, we had one, I think, all the way back to the 1800s, and then, you know, that's probably the earliest one that we've had, and that one was a woman who poisoned her children and her husband and his new wife or something like that.
Yikes.
But they've been all over the place. It's not just, you know, the first ones that might pop into your mind. So Angel Meat has a really good question in chat that we're gonna we have planned for a little bit later, but I'll go ahead and bring it up now. So he asks, how do you feel about exploring identity through role-playing games, exploring internal ideas through D&D that are otherwise difficult to express? And you can widen that to beyond D&D, but generally tabletop RPGs.
Fantastic. And it's a great way to explore not only your own understanding, but understanding of others. And it's something that I certainly encourage and always want people to do. I've made it a point for myself in playing, like, over the years, to always try out something new. And that's something we actually ask at the end of the show too. Like, how did you try out something new by playing this character? And how did you relate to the character? So you're like drawing the segue of like what you do understand and what was harder for you to understand, and then maybe that can serve as a bridge. But to, you know, play, I couldn't even tell you the strangest character that I've played, because I really try to be like all over the place.
His characters are wacky.
It really is purposeful. Like it's not just for the sake of, like, it's fun to be silly, but at the same time, it's like, I really want to understand, like, where this person is coming from, and whatever challenge comes up, I want to face it through these eyes. And so it really is a helpful tool. And so, yeah, to play the bard or the charisma character when that's something that you don't typically see as a part of yourself, you may be surprised, or just the fact of like coming out of your shell a little bit makes you feel better, or you make a new connection with somebody. It really is, I think, a powerful experience to see through fresh eyes that you wouldn't see just like in day-to-day life, you know, like or through the eyes of other forms of media, right? Like, so like through a movie, like you can relate to people and you can kind of get it, or through like a video game, but then you're limited to the code. But through tabletop games, the limit is yourself. So whatever limit you set for yourself, that's going to be it. And you can really push it. And then sometimes that might be so hard. And I can actually think of a great example of that happens right at the beginning of season 2 for us is I play the grandfather character for we're an entire family unit, and I'm like the grandfather slash father of 2 of the people who are there, and the relationship between the grandfather and the father is actually like really tense, and so I have to go out of my way to make these like poignant comments at Tony, and it was really hard. It's like, I like feel so uncomfortable doing this. That's actually probably the hardest character I've ever had to play, is to be mean to somebody, and trying to like it was like painful to do, and but that made me think like, so maybe this is the type of pain that they feel that makes them say it in the first place, but yeah, you really just never know like what new thing you can learn until you've tried it in like a safe setting like role playing.
Yeah, anything to add to that? Go ahead.
No, I mean, I think he pretty much outlined it probably better than I could, to be completely honest with you. But in that exact same game, the game that Conrad's talking about is RetroStar by Barack Blackburn, and it is in that particular game. I play the mother. Which is the first time I've ever actually played a character that was a different sex, different gender than myself. And so that was something that I actually had to try and explore through this particular game. I had to try to think more maternal. The game's also set in the late 70s, early 80s, so it's a completely different mindset, and you've got characters like Conrad's character that are womanizers and things like that walking around, and so I've got to try and think with that in mind as well. So that was certainly something that was different for me in that particular game, but it certainly allowed me to kind of explore some of those different like gender identities and things like that I may not have actually thought of before. So yeah, I think you can certainly do that.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely definitely something that I have on here to talk about a little bit later too. But with my kids and playing now, we've been playing D&D with them, so it's a little a longer process probably, but it's kind of one of those things that some of their personality comes out. Like I can definitely tell, like, yes, that is my 7-year-old speaking through this character. And then there's sometimes where I'm like, well, he would never say something like that in real life. And there have been moments where I'm like, let's talk about why you did that. Not in any kind of more in a mom's a little concerned that you're going to turn into one of these serial killers, but not, less in kind of a mental health capacity. So whenever you work with therapists and mental health providers, is that something that you guys coach them on, is how to have a conversation afterwards? Or is that something that you coach the players on, how to kind of explore those things on the front side?
So talking about what happened in the game afterward, I think is always excellent practice regardless. It's just because it's good to reflect on your own actions, and that's good practice outside of role-playing games too. Reflect on your own actions. So certainly, like, coming back to talk about it, and then how it affected you and how it affected other people and their perception of it. I mean, that's just like healthy skills for life. And so to go back and talk about it and why do you think you did that? And I mean, that's yes. The answer is basically always it's a good idea to reflect back and to have a discussion on what you did. Yeah.
So
and that's oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
All I was going to say was that's something that we do at the end of our show. So At the end of the game series, Conrad actually brought it up a little bit ago, but we sit down with the players and we ask them 4 questions, about the game. One of them being like, how did you, or how did you relate to your character, which I think what we brought up. But yeah, sit down with them and kind of reflect and almost like debrief the game and kind of get their ideas and, their thoughts rather, on the game and everything and, how it went. So. Yeah, definitely something that's worth doing.
So tell us a little bit more about your show, kind of how it's run and what you love about it and how it can be helpful to folks.
Sure. So I'll talk a little bit about like the show itself, and I'll pass it over to Conrad for about the more of the therapy side and how it can be helpful and things like that. But basically what we do is we take a look at different. We try to stick with independent role playing games because one of the other things that we try to do, and this is kind of a little bit of a side thing, but is really highlight a lot of the different independent games out there because there are a ton of games that aren't D&D that are just as good, if not better. And that's one of the things that we really try to highlight. So you'll never see us playing D&D or Pathfinder or anything like that. But things like Kids on Bikes or Clink, for a couple of the games that are off the top of my head, Goblinville was another one. But basically what we do is the first episode, we spend usually about maybe 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the game, where Conrad and I will do a bit of a funny back and forth on what the game is and what the rules are, and basically teach you how to play the game. Then we have a handful of episodes of us actually playing the game and our gameplay and all of that. And at the very last episode, at the very end of it, like I said, we'll have the wrap up with our group, kind of debrief the game, ask them the questions, and see what their thoughts are. And then after that, it comes back to Conrad and I, and we then, the two of us, kind of have an unscripted back and forth about the game and what Conrad would have recommended using that game for in a clinical setting, and things like that. We also have the Deegecast, which is our supplemental podcast for the show. It used to be a weekly thing. Now it's kind of more like when we get, I don't say we get to it, but when it's relevant, because we were kind of just pumping out. Anyway, when it's relevant to the show, but we'll have we've had just about every creator of the games that we've played come on, so we get to interview them and kind of talk to them about what their mindset was about going into the show, going into the games and creating the games. But we also kind of do a little bit more of a deep dive into the therapy side of things on the podcast as well. So that's a little bit kind of in a nutshell about what we do. And then in terms of how it can help people.
Yeah. So in terms of like how it can help people, like it's important to find what it's best at. I think like each independent game, that everything has their strengths and weaknesses. And so like some examples, Goblinville, as Nate said, it's really strong for I think for culture, for depression, for anxiety, and for a group setting. So one of the aspects of the game is you go to work and you get your scratch, and that's it. It's like real simple. Like you don't like everybody starts with a job. It can be like ditch digging. It's like the chopper. Like you have these jobs, and then you don't even have to do them. Like you just kind of like do something. So that like reminds me of kind of like Beck's checklist, like back like the beginning of like CBT and like what's used now for like homework and stuff. But like get out of bed, like take a shower, like really simple things could be like part of your checklist for depression. And like Goblinville, it's like very simple. Like the expectations are next to nothing. It's like, oh, you're a broke goblin, like in Goblinville. Like where our expectations.
Yeah, you are not a hero.
Yeah, right. Like we expect you to dig a hole. Like but that, and then we celebrate that by giving you your scratch, which is like the equivalent of money. And so it still is like a positive thing. Like it's kind of silly and kind of and it's funny, but like really simple things can be really powerful and positive, and they can, just be that first step to getting on track. So, it's really strong for that. And that's like one of the things we talk about and recommend it for. Another thing is part of like the creation process. I think that it's like fairly unique where you tell the tale of your goblin, then each other player begins asking you questions about that story, and you just kind of like then create this whole story together that like fleshes you out, and then the other players come up with titles for you. So like you're not assigning these titles, they do. And so that in itself has been also like really powerful for like just socialization. And I've seen it with like a number of groups now where people are kind of just sitting there looking at their character sheets for like the first few steps, and nobody's saying anything, and it's like we get to this part and the first person starts talking, and then even still there's like that silence, but then there's the first question, and then the person's like and they start like responding to that, and then you just kind of see like everybody starting to light up, and then like the questions like start firing, and then they'll just all over the place, and they don't have to be like any, because you're just like this silly goblin, and like the main town that I like to go to is just Dumpsturk is the one we called. And I think it sets this precedence of like it's funny and expectations are low, so that really gives people the freedom to say what they want. Another, I guess, like a totally different example would be RetroStar, which is that we referenced already in the show. And one really cool thing about that is they have something called dials. And the nature of the game is you're simulating sci-fi television specifically. So you have acts that you play out, and it's like, all right, here's like the first act of this TV episode. And then from there, like after you finish that, you go on to the next TV episode. But each episode has dials like cheese, special effects, seriousness, humor, and you set these dials in advance. So simulating like a group therapy session, like you can say like today's might be the day where we're all more comfortable talking about something a little more serious. Let's turn up that serious dial, but we're going to set it at 5 out of 7. So everybody's kind of on the same page about like how heavy-handed we want to go. And even still, you can like reel it in, but that allows you up front to kind of set your goals for the session, both in the role-playing game, but also in like the therapy aspect of it. And each game that we look at, we try to just find these different aspects of the rules and bring them to light and say, all right, well, you're doing this, try this. You're doing this, try this game. Like in terms of like complexity, that's another thing that we go from as simple as possible with Clink, where if you can flip a coin, you can play the game. And then we go all the way over to Early Dark, which we haven't showed yet, but we have it. And it's games within games. Like the combat, you're setting aside dice stacks, and you're trying to like outwit the dungeon or game master, and like defeat not just the monster, but also like them psychologically. And that's like one aspect of this like greater game where there's just so much crunch to it. So in terms of, benefit there, like some people like really don't want something simple, and they want something really in depth that they can throw themselves into. Because if it's too simple, then they're just, this is like too much of a surface level thing. I can't become invested in it. I don't care about it. You're not going to get anything out of me. But on the flip side, then you have people who are like, well, this is too complicated. I can't think about what I need to think about. So having the range of complexity of rules is important too. So again, we're just really trying to find something for everybody, and that can help everybody.
Yeah, so I want to go back to something that you guys mentioned, that you've had a lot of the developers on your show. And so you also mentioned that some of these things meet the different needs of different people and they fill different things. And have the developers, have they generally said they were trying to fill a specific need that they hadn't found in a game before? Or are they trying to be more holistic in general? Or is it a pretty good mix of both?
It's a pretty good mix of both. We've gotten a lot of responses from developers that they're like, when we made this game, we had no therapeutic intentionality whatsoever. We had no idea that you could actually use this game for therapy. We didn't even know that there was one of the games that we've actually talked about at this point, a game called Clink, where if you can flip a coin, you can play an RPG. And that game by David Shadouen is, when he created, he had no idea that therapeutic gaming was even a thing until we reached out to him and said, "Hey, we use this on our show. Would you be interested in talking to us and whatnot?"
That's awesome.
And now he's actually actively involved in our community and things like that, which is really cool. But then there are, on the complete flip side, there were developers. One of the guys, Bear Winters, created a game called Project Biomotus. And that game is another really super crunchy game, but it's all Conrad. What's the term I'm looking for here? What the game revolves around? Body. I can't think of what it is, but I'll think of it like in about 20 minutes and just blurt it out, I'm sure. But basically, like it's a post-apocalyptic game and it's really crunchy and all this stuff. But Bear Winters actually had therapeutic intentionality going into this and things like that. So it's really a mix from everybody. We've also had people on the show like Jack Birkenstock from the Bodana Group, and they've created a game as well. Which, by the way, I talked with Jack yesterday. He wanted me to say hello, so
Hi.
Jack says hi.
Love Jack.
But yeah, like it's really been. Gotta love Jack. But yeah, it is. It's a plethora of responses from those developers.
Yeah.
Because that's actually like one of the questions we ask them when we interview them. It's like what therapeutic benefit do you see for your game? And it really has been interesting, the responses. And for some of them too, it's been therapeutic, just the creation of it. And they like start talking about that, where I was like in like this part of my life, and kind of putting it to paper and putting it into this game format really allowed me to go through it. And so that's kind of like another thing, like we like drawing light to, that the creation of games is in itself like another therapeutic thing. But
transhumanism. Yeah. I said I was going to just blurt it out randomly. Transhumanism. That's the word I was looking for.
We were getting suggestions in chat that I was going to read to you, but now I don't have to.
Was that one of them?
No, that was not one.
No. Dysmorphia. Hey, Josh, what's up? Josh said dysmorphia. It wasn't dysmorphia.
Sorry, we derailed there, but that's okay. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to throw you off.
Listen, I was just this weekend talking about how my brain, they say like 100 tabs and 3 of them playing music. That's not my brain. My brain is a slow-moving tornado, and stuff will go ahead of me, and I'm like, oh, that, right. And then I get sucked back into the tornado, and I'm like, I have no idea what I was thinking about 3 seconds ago. So it's all good. Yeah, so I mean, it's really interesting.
I like that analogy.
Well, and also somewhere in that tornado, there's a radio. We were talking about singing. There's a radio in there somewhere. There's a TV playing some movies, because half my brain is movie quotes. I mean, look, this tornado has it all. If it was organized, we'd be in trouble. So it's interesting to hear that some of them intended to put that in, and some of them didn't intend, but that's kind of where it wound up. That's really neat. That's really cool.
Yeah, one of the games in particular is a game called Mashed, which if anybody remembers the iconic TV show MASH, you can kind of get an idea of what the game is all about. And he did the creator of the game had absolutely no intentionality behind it, had no idea, but then it started to be something that for PTSD and things like that with vets and stuff. So it's really interesting to kind of get and get a deep dive and into their brain and find out what things have been used for, when it really wasn't designed for that in the first place.
Yeah. So, what are each of y'all's hands down absolute favorite tabletop RPG, and does that differ from your favorite when it comes to something that can then be applied in therapy?
Go first because I have a lot. Cross them off my list.
All right, sounds good. So I think there's a couple of them. So I'm going to narrow it down to two, and one of them is still technically kind of like alpha. It's not even actually necessarily like super out yet. It is, but and that game's called Ripe, which is also another game by David Shadoin, who did the Clink flip a coin game. What I really, really, really like about this game, not only is it simple to play, but you're playing old people. You're all old, so you've got to deal with arthritis. You've got to deal with just forgetting things. You've got to anything that comes with old age is something you kind of have to deal with in this game. But you also have like a different side of you that's a little bit heroic. So you kind of have to. There's a balance there. There's a balance that takes place, and when you kind of use this heroic aspect of yourself, it kind of hurts you hurts your mortal body, if you will. So that's really cool to kind of get into and play simply because it's such a simple game, but it's so different than what you're used to. I mean, you like these people are, 60, 70 plus or something like that. A lot of times when you think of elders in fantasy, you think of somebody like Gandalf or Yoda that are like thousands and thousands of years old, not necessarily like in their 80s or 70s or something like that. There's a few characters, but generally it's thousands or hundreds of years old. So that's what I really like about this. You can kind of create a unique character that's not something you probably would create in any other game. The other one is Kids on Bikes, or really any of the Kids on games, Teens in Space, Kids on Brooms, which I haven't played either Teens in Space or Kids on Brooms yet, but I really, really want to. We plan on Kids on Bikes was our first game that we played in season 1. It was very like our pilot game for Dungeons and Dragons. And I think I had the most fun playing that, to be honest with you. I've loved diving into that character. We plan on taking those characters into space and Teens in Space very soon. I hope, Conrad, I hope. But one of the reasons I really like that, Kids on Bikes in particular, is again, super easy to just pick up and play. There's not really a whole heck of a lot of rules and crunch to it, which and a lot of it's all storytelling. It's all story driven and narrative, which is really what I'm drawn to more than sitting there rolling a whole bunch of dice and doing a buttload of damage. I want to kind of get into the story and things like that. But I like Kids on Bikes because it's where you're playing a kid. Well, you could play either a kid, a teenager, or an adult. But let's be honest, playing a kid's the most fun. When you're playing a kid, there's like certain things that are paranormal in the game, but then you also kind of have to say, okay, is this really a ghost, or is it just the shadow of something in my room that looks like a ghost or whatever? But I'm a kid and think it's or is it really? So there's that back and forth there. But I both of those games are for those reasons are two that I was really drawn to, that we've played throughout the course of our show anyway, which is more or less my gaming history anyway. So yeah.
Okay. So it's tough to really say the hands down favorite one. I too really like story, but I also love a lot of crunch. Unlike you. So I'll say of the games that we've played, my two favorites are Shattered and Early Dark. and both of them have really like robust systems with lots of customization, and they both have just like cool worlds. So like one is like a post-apocalyptic one, and the other one is really more like ancient culture. And for that, the game was actually designed by an anthropologist, and so like he, knew what he was talking about when he went into like the all the advanced cultural aspects of building a nation and what each one meant. But what's really cool about that is you don't create a hero out of thin air. You find one that is part of the culture already. And I think that in itself is like a super cool concept that I haven't seen that in another game. And yeah, so that's all really fun. And the combat is like complex enough where it's like it just adds another layer. Where like Dungeons and Dragons, like it can be fun, but like if you're just like the fighter, especially like in like older versions too, like you hit it with your sword. Next round, you hit it with your sword. And so like I can get why that, just like rolling the same dice over and over, it's like, all right, I'm gonna find how I can position myself differently to then hit it with my sword. So I get why, that can be boring for people, but with like Shattered, you have movement, and you have action points. So like you can just do like a whole bunch of different things, and you just have this currency that you essentially use to do whatever you're doing. And it's not a set order like in Dungeons and Dragons. Like your team can coordinate. So like every single round, you can kind of adjust what you're doing to set up more complex strategies, while the enemies can also do that. So I think having like more living battlefields for combat is a lot of fun. In terms of one for therapy, I feel like my gut instinct was kind of like Goblinville, what I was talking about before. I feel like that and Clink. So they both can be really played by anybody, and that I guess is like the starting point.
Yeah.
So, like you really want to be able to go from there, and especially if you're running a group setting or people of different backgrounds and stuff, like you really want to have that accessibility. I will say the most fun being a game master for, though, is a newer one. That's Cartoon Action Hour. And what we did for that is like it's for like 80s and 90s cartoons. So like G.I. Joe, Thundercats, He-Man, Voltron. And then even like if you want to do like Fairly Odd Parents or SpongeBob and stuff, like you can make those things work, certainly. And I actually don't want to spoil what we did, but we did a lot of fun stuff for it, and it was really fun creating cartoons.
Yeah, that cartoons are always appealing, but I mean, even playing D&D with my two kids, one of them's 7, one of them's 14, and like my 7-year-old, first of all, is very much just let me bunk it with the sword, and I don't want to do any of the talking. Like, let me go sharpen my sword while y'all are talking. And then my 14-year-old is very much more into the story part of it. She's actually being our DM for it, so that's been quite fun as well. So it's one of those things that I think that you get a lot out of it depending on what you put into it. Like, would my 7-year-old get more out of it if he participated more in the non-bunkin parts? Probably. But does he have the does he have the capacity to really understand what he should be doing in those narrative portions where it's just completely free for all? Like, definitely something more structured and something more structured and more laid out for him, I think would be better if this was being used for something like therapy, which it's being used for self-care at this point. So we do have a couple community questions, and I'm gonna pose this question to you guys, and then I'm going to give you a little bit of a pause to think about it. So the question from Bite Mark is, what are your favorite poems? So be thinking about that. And then Lilithan, don't know if I'm saying your name right, but hey, the stream summary. So I just popped in kind of the topic there, but we're talking about using tabletop RPGs to reframe self-understanding and as a tool when facing chronic illness. And we've got a couple of guests here, some super cool guys from, I don't know, some sort of podcast called Dish Time, you know, check it out. And I've got some links for you too. And then while y'all are thinking about your favorite poems also, I will also welcome in Chosen. Thank you so much for that raid. Welcome everybody who came in here with Chosen. Appreciate you being here tonight. Hope you enjoy your stay. Oh, and then we do have one more question after the poems. So
yeah.
Uh-oh.
I was wondering myself. I think your sound cut out.
Uh-oh. Can you guys hear me in the stream?
I guess it's not me.
Discord can't hear me. All right, give me just 1 second. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Somehow without even going into Discord wasn't even the first thing on my screen. I muted myself in Discord. Because I'm fancy like that. When I said I'm the one who has all the technical issues, I was not lying. I wasn't lying. So
it happens to the best of us.
So the two questions that we have right now are, what are your favorite poems? And also, do you prefer square or hex grid? So we'll go with the poems one first, and whichever one of you is prepared can answer first.
I'll look at Conrad, because I was trying to even think of this earlier today, and I came up short. I came up short with the poem thing.
I think I'd have to say, and I feel so ashamed that I can't even think of the author. I can get it in 2 seconds.
While he's doing that, when it comes to poems, like the majority of the poems I think I've read were by Shel Silverstein. So Jimmy Jett and his TV set, fantastic.
There you go. That's totally fine. I mean, one time we had someone, was it Twinkle Twinkle Little Star was their favorite poem? Or something to that effect. Like, that's fine. It could be roses or red, violets or blue. Look, it could be Jingle Bells, Batman Smells, for all I care.
All right.
So I'd say mine is The Tiger of William Blake. And I guess the first verse is, Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? And it just so perfectly captures so much in such a short thing. I think it's such a beautiful way to describe something so frightening. So yeah, I'd say that's probably my number one.
That's a great one. So every time I read that poem, in my head I go symmetry, and then I'm like, damn it. That's not it. Oh, yes. Good choice, Dee. There you go. Bite Mark said my favorite is a Shel Silverstein as well. Listen to the Mustn'ts. See?
That's a good one. That is a good one.
There are no wrong answers here whatsoever.
All right.
So now the square grid versus hex grid question.
Yes. I think I'm going to go with hex grid because it gives you more opportunity. It gives you more directions that you can go in. I think that's my answer.
So I'm actually a square. And that it's really
Yeah, you
more
are.
from a practical standpoint where I'm not too handy with a pencil, and when I'm just like tracing out dungeons and stuff, it's just much easier for me to follow along straight lines like that.
That's a valid point.
Yeah, I'm not the map maker. I'm not the map maker. He is.
That's all it is. It's really like the only reason. It's not like I know that with like figurines and stuff, a lot of those have the like hexagon bases, so it doesn't exactly fit when you have those. But yeah, just for my personal ease, it's squares.
Yeah. Look, that's fine. I don't have a preference, so y'all are ahead of me. Lilithan said, as a neuroatypical dungeon mistress, this might be an interesting thing to listen to while I can't sleep. Absolutely. Welcome. I found, though, that most discussions around mental health seem to focus on the more easily digestible disorders, likely not too applicable for me, but still interesting. Lilithan, if you have something that you want to hear on a future show, please join the Discord and put it in suggestions, and we can always talk about if you have something in particular that you want to hear about on a future show. Just let us know. No judgment either way. I just find it interesting what different people prefer. Absolutely, that's on the poems and the hex, probably both. Hex versus square. So the past 16 months now have really challenged a lot of people, and I'm curious to know if you guys have had any challenges educating about using tabletop RPGs in therapeutic environments, and if you've had any big wins at the same time. Or have you guys always done everything virtual?
No, we haven't.
Okay.
No.
But
Yeah,
I think it's
so that-
actually been great. Oh, sorry, Nate, you go ahead.
So, well, yeah. So basically, that was our biggest thing is trying to go virtual. So we had what I was calling MacGyver Studio in Conrad's basement, which worked, which was great, and it was awesome to have all of us around a table. But then obviously pandemic hit, and we couldn't really do that. So I had to kind of switch gears and figure out a good way of doing it. Zoom was a great option for us. So Zoom is now how we do it. But I don't want to necessarily assume what Conrad was just about to say, but I think what he might have been about to say was it's been great because we've been able to get people on the show that wouldn't otherwise not be able to be on the show unless they were to physically fly into New England. And I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't want to do that to play, a game. I mean, unless they did, then hey, come on down or up, depending on where you are. But that was probably our biggest challenge, was trying to switch gears and be virtual. Still really looking forward to getting back around the table again for season 3. But yeah, we've got everything filmed for season 2 already, even though it's not. We're only in our first game. But yeah, really looking forward to that. But that was our biggest challenge. I think our biggest win, or at least for me, was actually figuring out a good way of actually doing that, going virtual. But for one of the other things was, and this really isn't to do with going virtual, but in editing the show, I found that like I was having a lot of trouble finding free use music that I could use on the show without copyrights and things like that. That fit the narrative or fit like the kind of the mood of what I was going for. And I'm not super musically inclined, but I'm like, hey, I'm gonna figure out how to make music so I can just make what I want and put it in the show. And I did. So I've been doing that since September now. Most of the music in season 2 is stuff that I came up with. Even the end of season 1, for that matter. Most of the stuff I came up with. So I think that was the biggest win for me. It was kind of figuring out a completely different hobby just by a need for the show. Just something that's that's more my self-care than a hobby. Is like I'll sit down and like just create something. And that was probably my biggest win from kind of having to deviate and switch.
I will say that from the very beginning of recording, it's been a lot about adapting, and Nate has done a phenomenal job right from the start. Like the night before we went to shoot the very first game, the camera battery like melted into
Oh, I forgot about that.
the camera. So then that camera was busted, and then had to like panic switch with that. The sound was.
I ran out and
even
bought a
though
new camera.
Yeah, like so Nate immediately like went out, got that like new camera, and so that was ready to go in the morning. And then even though we had like a few, we were just kind of guessing, you know, like what people recommended. So we had like a few microphones that like, all right, these like, you know, are decent microphones that like people recommended. We set them up in the room, and there was still just awful sound, and it was echoing, and the room was, I mean, it was an unfurnished room. So like, all right, well, we'll get foam paneling and like put that on the walls, and all right, we'll add a carpet. All right, we'll add 2 carpets. All right, we're gonna change our microphones. All right, we're gonna change our microphones again. Like, so it's just a constant shifting process. But all of these ideas were, you know, from Nate's like, all right, well, I think that this might help improve it. This might help improve it. And then they did. And then basically like once we were like, all right, we got it squared away. We're good. We're in the room. Nate can like edit this, like, you know, and just get to it. Oh, we have to switch. so then we switched to online, and yeah. And the whole time too, while like through the editing process, Nate was like improving on his graphic design, and like I think it's great. And then adding music to the mix, and to the point now I don't made like 20 songs at this point, right?
Yeah, something like that. Maybe a little bit more than that.
Yeah, so
right around there. Yeah,
making tons of music. So I think in terms of like Nate's artsy side, it's like it's I've really seen it grow. It's
something I didn't know existed, and then I started doing this.
Yeah, because I remember going back to 4th grade when we drew our little characters and our what are those particular notebooks called? But anyway,
composition notebooks.
Yeah, it was like a brand that everyone was. It was like black, but it was almost like a camo like pattern, like the black white like splatter paint that like everybody had. But anyway, and yeah, and like not like mine were good either, but it's just, you know, like we just had
mine were terrible. my little doodles were terrible. Let's just awful. I still have them up there on the shelf.
but now I think it's great, and so like actually watching that has been I think has been a win too, just to get to see that growth. But I think if Nate didn't think that about himself, he should. That was definitely a win. In terms of educating, I think that it's actually been a blessing in disguise, where the community seems to have like just come alive. You know, like it was always supportive. Like anytime we posted anything, there were certainly positive responses. But once like the pandemic struck, all of these different messaging systems became very active, and there was all sorts of, you know, online conventions going on, and we were able to connect with lots of new people. And yeah, that was all just like that aspect of it was cool. So in terms of getting like the message spread around and out there, I think that has been sort of a blessing in disguise. And now like we have plans for like future conferences with groups and people that we've met. So that those have all been wins, I'd say.
Yeah, it's always neat to see we weren't prepared for this, but oh my gosh, was it really cool kind of thing. So it's good to hear that some of it has been a blessing. And it's also really cool that, you know, Nate, you make the music, and then Conrad, do you sing it all for the show, or do you just make up your own lyrics in your head as you're listening to it?
I would sing it for a track if Nate wanted me to, but I do sing briefly during the wrestling game we do, because it's the one
Yeah,
game
that's right.
that Nate actually runs, and I'm a player. And my character is back. Part of his background is he's the son of opera singers whose lifelong dream, though, was to be a professional wrestler, but still grew up in that. And so his theme entrance is singing an aria to somebody in the audience. And so I briefly started singing an aria to Victoria, I think it was. Victoria,
Yeah, Victoria. Her name.
Victoria. Yeah. That's what
Yep.
it was.
Love it. That's awesome. So, how can tabletop role playing games be used to reframe your own self understanding?
Jump into this, unless you want to go, Nate.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, I have used this personally to reframe a lot. My own background, I grew up and into early adulthood was spent all that time constantly doing something. So I had started swimming when I was 5, and that led to all sorts of other sports where I was doing some sort of training every day, and I loved it, and I loved being an athlete, and I played water polo, and I went around the country for that, and got to play with all sorts of like cool teams. But once illness came, then it just started becoming harder and harder to maintain any sort of like physical shape. And like at first, like I could still do it, and I was still, strong, but then I was like losing speed because doing like cardio was like more painful and harder as opposed to like just lifting. But I was still satisfied with it. It's like, all right, well, I'm still strong. And then that became harder, and then it got to the point where I had, as you'd said back at the beginning, I had a few surgeries that ended up with some nerve damage, and now I get these bouts of pain over the most trivial things. Like the other day, I was filing papers, and then like I was hunched over, like totally crippled by it. And so I had spent a lot of my life too, like believing, because like it's part of my identity, like being an athlete and being physically strong. That's like what it meant to be strong, and that's like, and if you couldn't do that, it's because you lacked the effort, and because that's how all of my own accolades came about. It's like it's just a matter of effort, and I learned that wasn't the case through illness. It's like I'm putting in the effort and I can't do it. So it became like my understanding, changed, but it's still initially, and actually not initially, until very recently, still, it's still sometimes hard to deal with. But I felt weak, and like, I'm frail, like I can't do that. And now like I have a 13-pound dog, and I can carry around for 5 minutes, and then like, oh, my back's killing me, and it's like, and that's nothing, that's not a significant amount of weight. And so all of my life, like I had ingrained in my identity, like, athleticism is like a major part of who I am, and being strong and fast of body means being strong and fast. And through role playing, though, I have found ways to redefine strength and redefine, just who I am. And one of the things that, it's kind of something that I always thought was silly before, but I think is true now. You look at the mountain and you think, oh, that is a symbol of strength, but the mountain is unmoving, solid and rigid. And the river will eventually part the mountain. Water itself is fluid and flexible, and being able to do that is true strength, being able to adjust to the hardships that come your way rather than just grit down and, you know, force it to bounce off of you or something. That's not true strength. And through role playing, again, like I've come to terms with things like that, like where I've played these characters where, like, all right, like my character is going to believe this. Okay, we'll just pretend at first, but then actually playing through it and saying those same things to other people when challenged, and having to argue that perspective, then it's, oh, now that I'm actually arguing that point of view, I'm starting to think that there's like a grain of truth to it, or maybe there's quite a bit of truth to it. And so having you know, the strength to be fluid has really become now like a new part of my identity, that I have to, you know, look at each day as like a different day. And whatever challenges come, we'll have to make some adjustments rather than battering ram through it. But having to come to terms with, you know, you couldn't go in the car ride the way you would want it to. Like, you need to have something special prepared in the car in order to get there and in order to sit comfortably in it. And adding that to your day, maybe you just need to do that. It's not a sign of weakness that you need some aid. And being able to accept that you need that, I think, is a lot stronger than thinking that you don't. And so I think of some concrete examples of characters, but or maybe while I think of those, I can pass over to Nate.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have a whole heck of a lot to add from what Conrad said there, because I think that what he said kind of really describes it well. But you know, for me, you know, I've this past year was very difficult for me for a lot of reasons, COVID related, but I also went through divorce. Pretty rough time for me. And when we were basically, whenever I was able to kind of just stop and play a game, I was able to kind of just take things out of my head, forget what was going on, and just kind of focus on the game, on my character. And through that, like, I was able to just kind of like start to think about things just in a little bit of a different way. You know, things didn't necessarily seem quite as important in the grand scheme of things when I was able to kind of finally take myself out of what was going on in reality. And through that, I've, like Conrad just kind of said, you know, take things day by day. And it's something him and I have talked about in the past too, and for completely different reasons, him for medical reasons and myself just for the things going on in my life. But it's one of those things that I've certainly tried to do myself, and take things day by day, with through role playing. Through those, you know, you start to learn a little bit more about yourself. You know, one of the things, like I said, you know, like in RetroStar, you know, I'd never played a female character before. So starting to have to think in that particular mindset, it kind of broke down a couple barriers that I might have had, you know, in thinking of, you know, having to think like somebody completely differently gendered than myself. So, and caught me thinking about a couple different things too, but that's beside the point. But yeah, so anyway, Conrad, if you want to, I don't know if you have your thought back.
So I think one example that comes to mind, that, again, kind of a silly character, but I was playing this elf monk who was like cloistered from very young age, and everything he knew about other cultures was purely what he read in the monastery, which was all old and outdated. So for the campaign, I was attending one of my childhood friends' weddings, and it was an orc wedding. And so everybody there was an orc except for my childhood friend. And so I went through like strutting about like, oh, I know everything there is to know because I read all of it. And this kind of makes me think about, well, I think I know what strength is, and I think I know what these things mean. And as I'm like walking through, and one of them is the fashion that was in was like these particular like ox skin boots that went to the mid calf, and you wanted to make sure that you could show off like just enough knee and all of this stuff. It was the fashion was like really detailed, and so oh, okay, well, I'll try these things on. And when I went to the boutique for advice, there was this older orc there who was like, oh, well, try on this great like yak headdress, and it's really lavish, and this is what's really going to make everybody see you. And so basically, based on everything that was said so far, I, in my own characters, like, of course, like I know this to be true, but at this point it was outdated and used for something else. And so I start going, and everybody's incredibly offended by my presence with this yak headdress. They're like, oh, like that, how dare you? Like that's supposed to like symbolize like doom and gloom, and like this is supposed to be a happy occasion. And I like kind of like froze in that moment, like, oh, like I thought I knew this to be like knew this truth that I am now learning is just not the case. Just like a kind of a silly moment of just you think you know something, but that's just not the case. And you can either go with it or adapt to it, or you dig your heels in and you might struggle. And in that moment, I initially wanted to struggle, but then I decided to adapt to it. And anyway, so that's just like one like little example.
Kind of giving you the confidence to deal with something unexpected in the real world a little bit.
Right.
I think that confidence building is really important. And I mean, you get that a lot with especially RPGs. I mean, there's some other games that you can pick up confidence and skill from, but there's nothing like a little bit of imagination to help you through some stuff sometimes.
Certainly. Yeah.
So are there any limits to which players might benefit from therapeutic gaming sessions? And I this comes up every now and then. We've talked about running D&D sessions with veterans, or running kids on bikes with kids, or lots of different ages, but we've also talked about kind of the barriers a little bit with age. And so I'm just wondering, are there any limits to who might benefit from a therapeutic gaming session with an RPG?
Well, I can jump in if those of you have something to say, Nate.
Yeah. No, I mean, go ahead. This I think is more suited for you.
So I think in terms of age, there might be an upper limit, but I don't really think that there's necessarily a lower limit. One of the games that we played is called No Thank You Evil, and I've kind of like been thinking of it as baby's first RPG. They actually go through the rules and they divide them into and they're all simple anyway, but there's 3 levels of rules, and they like have a shape next to each one, like to note like if you're at this level, or if you're, and they actually say like age 4, like if you're 4 years old, like you could do this, and they have those all throughout the book to show like, all right, if you're at this age group, you could play these rules this way. And with character creation at the highest level, it's still you create yourself based on a sentence, and it's just I am an adjective, noun, who, verbs. And so the so an example is like, I am a crunchy chicken nugget who kicks butt. And I actually take that from my nephew-in-law type. He's like a cousin-in-law's son. But anyway, he went as a chicken nugget for Halloween, and like, oh, okay, sure. So that just made me think, like, all right, you can go ahead, be your chicken nugget and fight forces of evil as a chicken nugget. But at the simplest level, it's just simply I am noun. And so, I mean, any 4-year-old can come up with what they want. Like, oh, I want to be an astronaut, or I want to be a clown. I want to be like a pony. And that's your character, and you just kind of go from there. In terms of like the benefits you can gain from it, I think they certainly change as you age, but even like patience, like right from like that young age where you're sitting still to like around a table to play a game, patience, social skills, creativity, being channeled into like a more direct way. And I mean, you can still go ahead, draw your character, like whatever, to become more immersed in this experience. And one of the other parts of the game is you have a few stats, and one of them is just fun. And having fun is is just awesome. Having fun is actually a different rule. But awesome is a stat, and all awesome is you help other people. It's like, hey, you were awesome just there. Like, other people get a bonus. And so, like, as a 4-year-old, it's like, that's like kind of what you're associating in this game. Like, being awesome means that you help others, and you move away from your egocentric thinking of, that you naturally have in youth. So, yeah, so just from that example alone, I think that you can certainly start gaining benefits from a very young age. When I think about the upper limit, like I try to picture like my grandmother's 99, and I try to envision her role playing, and I just can't see it. There could be other like 99-year-olds out there who were like really sharp and like open to like doing something like that, and like power to them. But it might be hard at this point. Maybe like when we're 99, then it'll be like more of a thing. But current 99, I think it might be hard to pull some sort of benefit from if like they can't get into it, because that's like the biggest thing, is like you gotta like get into it. But certainly anybody who could get into a role-playing game could pull therapeutic benefit from it, in my opinion.
Yeah, this could be like our generation's version of Bridge.
Oh my gosh, yes.
That would be fantastic.
Nate, did you want to add anything there?
No, I mean, it basically, no, I didn't really have a whole heck of a lot to add there. No, I just kind of, I think I pretty much agree with him. In terms of like, like he said, with No Thank You Evil, that was a very easy game to pick up and play. Even I could pick it up and play, so anybody can do it. But yeah, like he was saying, even just trying to think of like my parents, who are, they're right around that 70-year-old mark. My dad, maybe. My mom, no way. I don't think she could wrap her head around, even some of the most basic of the rules. And that's not a knock on her. I just don't, it's just not something that I think she'd quite be able to understand. So I think there might be an upper age limit, absolutely, but yeah, in terms of a lower age limit, I think yeah, as long as you can read and write, you can certainly take some benefit away from it for sure.
Yeah. So, do you guys encourage game masters, whether they are mental health professionals or not, to employ any safety measures in their games?
Yeah, definitely. We talk, and I can have Conrad talk a little bit more specifics of some of them, but yeah, that's something we talk about quite a bit in whether it be in the first episodes of some of our games or the wrap ups of some of our games. But it's certainly a topic we get into quite often. But yeah, definitely, using like the X card or something along those lines in case somebody is feeling uncomfortable or that they don't necessarily want to get into something while this game is going on. Absolutely is something that we certainly recommend doing. I don't know if Conrad, if you want to get into maybe anything other than the X card. I know there were a couple others that I don't think we've necessarily dove into on our show yet.
I think that even when you're playing with like people that that you could still do over like the basics of like safety precautions. Like there might be like something that you just don't know about them. I mean, like even with like Nate and I, it's like, over 20 years, like we probably have like a pretty good idea, but I still might do something that makes them uncomfortable. And even so, like I could probably just see that. So, but I still would want him, certainly, like I want to move on from this. And if whether that just be like, a quick hand raise or like a certain like level of eye contact, if he doesn't want other people to know about it. But definitely, like if you're playing with people you don't know, you want to set some sort of foundation. You like telling like what is to expect from a game, I think is like just kind of common courtesy. If like a game has adult themes, you should list out what those themes are in advance. And then I think it's good practice to have kind of like a basic sheet of like going a little bit further in depth, so maybe like in terms of violence, like if it's like humanoid on humanoid violence, like the sky's the limit. But if it has anything to do with like an animal, anything is completely unacceptable. And like not even like off camera scene, like I don't want that at all in my game. So there, even like if you're very much into violence with something, you may be 100% against violence with a separate thing. So it's not even like you can say like, is violence okay? So having categories, I think is good practice for everybody.
Well, I'm glad you said even with people that you know, because so much even I like I said, we play with my family, and even if I were just playing with my sister or something, if we didn't go over something and she didn't know about something that had happened to me and I had never shared it, because there's still such that stigma against things happening in your life, and sometimes things mental health related, or sometimes things whether it's sexual assault or something different, you just don't know what's happened to someone. And it's really important if you're setting up those boundaries to kind of do it in an open way that's fairly comprehensive. I like going that next step. I think that's a smart way to do that. And we talked about post session a little bit. Do you guys do a pre-session as well, where you set those up? And is that part of the therapeutic piece, or is that just generally speaking?
Do you want me? I could just go. Let's see what you say.
Yeah, go ahead. If you want to jump in.
So something that I like to do in general is part of like coming up with the backstories for people, and then like kind of like what, as a part of that, like what do you expect from this game? And so it's kind of like a little bit of a back and forth. Like you might, oh, okay, so I think I might want to introduce this based on kind of like what you want from this backstory. And that is kind of like how the pre-session ends up for. It's usually like on an individual level with like me, but I think that it would certainly be good with any group. And kind of like what we were talking about with RetroStar earlier, like how they have dials and like that is like what you're setting like for the TV episode. I think that in itself, if you wanted to do that with every single game, would be like a cool way to go about it. Because if you're like, all right, how about I set the humor level at 7? You might have a group that despises that, you know, like no, we want to take this seriously. Like, it's not what we want from our game. All right, how about the humor level at 2? So like, you know, I can at least make a pun every once in a while. Like, all right, fine. You know,
It's gonna happen whether you want it to or not, but I can tone it down.
right, yeah. So I think that in terms of what the group wants, because like I know like we play so much with like the same people, so like, it's not something we do all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely, yeah, playing with like new faces. You definitely want to have pre-sessions where you can figure out kind of the things you want from a game. Like when I'm like at a convention or something and I am like about to run a game, they have the little thing in advance where it's like, this is like in the Wild West with, you know, rated R and for these reasons. But even so, like listen, like I still will go about things in like a funny way, and there's going to be, and I like will tell people like things that they can expect. And if that's set up front, then it just kind of creates a culture from the beginning rather than an uneasiness when it does rear its head. And certainly too, people can be like, okay, I'm out, and they have the opportunity to leave if they really don't want to do it. Or they might ask like to tone something down a little bit, which that's fine. Like you can tone certain things down as opposed to outright cutting them. So an example of this is I was running this Clink game where there's a secret underground like nightclub that was inside of a dried out well, and the level of adultness there has varied considerably between games. So run that same session quite a few times, and some people are like, don't care, like can be like as adult and include everything to the point where it's just like a fiddler's concert. It's just like a bunch of people with fiddles and they're serving juice. So, you know, like there are things when you have those pre-sessions, like, okay, I have a way I can change that and I can make that still work and the story can still take place there. We can still have this underground nightclub. It's just going to have a very different theme.
Yeah. I really like the idea of the dials because I know in my therapy sessions, sometimes my therapist will ask me like, can we go here today? Can we talk? Are you in a place where you can talk about this today? And I think in a game session, especially, and for me, most of the time it'd be on like, I need something lighter today because I'm not in like a therapeutic session or anything. So most of the time it would be in a casual game, just saying, let's dial the serious back a little and the humor up. But having that flexibility sounds fantastic. That's great. And then whenever you do
the mechanic I really like about it.
Yeah.
I was saying the mechanic that I really like about you know that particular game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems really neat and not something that I don't think I would have thought of outside of this conversation, honestly. So, do you guys, when you play a casual game, do y'all do a post session after even a casual game, or is that mostly for your podcast and mostly for therapeutic situations?
Yeah, generally. I mean, if anything, it's really mostly like, oh my God, can you believe we got to do this? In terms of, you know, any sort of a post session, you know, if we're playing a casual game, most of the time it's at least in my experience anyway, it's really been mostly for when we're doing the therapeutic stuff.
Yeah.
I've spent hours, like as much time playing the game, like talking about it afterward.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like the experiences that you can share through this like form of media is just so unique, and getting to talk about, especially if it's like really story heavy, then there's so much to talk about.
Yeah.
And like one thing, like on like the personal kind of just like hangout style, if I'm the dungeon master, I have all sorts of like really interpersonal stories going on, where there's like pages and pages of knowledge that like one player will have that nobody else has. So there's just lots going on. They'll be like texting me like, all right, well, this about, you know, XYZ. I'm like, okay, great. Yeah. Got to the point where one character, or one player, I should say, went like totally off the rails, like full evil. And he set up this elaborate frame job like weeks in advance. And I mean like out of game, weeks in advance, on another player in the game, where he was going to be like framed for this murder. And like as it was happening, the other player was like, what? And he's like looking at me like, why is this happening? And he's like, all right, well, I'll do this. But the other player had like already like set up all of these measures to counter these things that he would say, and like all this like fake evidence that he like had already rolled checks on. And so when things like when the games like have things like that, you can't help but talk about it.
Yeah, no kidding.
Oh yeah.
So like to this day, I don't think Nate had this pet hippogriff that he had caught in the wild after all of these outrageously good rolls. He's just like, nah, 20, nah,
I was
20.
so excited about it.
Yeah, so he just like caught,
so
he had like
excited
no
about
skills
it.
for it. He just like caught this hippogriff and like started having it trained and stuff. And then somebody had killed it. And I think to this day, he doesn't know the truth behind it.
I don't think I do.
Because the last thing that I think happened with you was the guy that you thought did it. His like last words were like, "Wait, it wasn't," and that was just kind of it. And that was the resolution of that from your perspective. But I keep all my other players' secrets. So
I was gonna say, do you know? Do you know who did it?
I guess not. I guess not.
Man.
I still don't know. I have, if I remember who's in the session, I think I might have an idea.
who's to say it was in the session?
Oh.
You know, like I said, Donovan planned that frame job on Paul weeks in advance.
Yeah, well, that's who I was going to say I was, but Donovan. But all right.
It actually wasn't him.
I got to think.
Y'all are gonna talk about
That's
this after for sure.
Surprising.
I was gonna say,
Yeah, definitely.
See? Years.
I know, you're not kidding.
I know. This has got to be at least like 10 years ago. I mean, God.
That's amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, it's,
So,
I mean,
yes,
you
talking
got,
about it
all
afterwards.
sorts of, right, absolutely, yeah. So
Oh,
if you
yeah.
guys weren't doing what you do now, or if you had chosen something different in your lives, what would you be doing now?
Well, I'm an IT guy by day. That's what pays the bills. I think in no surprise to anybody, it would probably have something to do with the wrestling business. I don't know if I'd actually want to be a wrestler myself, or behind the scenes, or an announcer, or something like that. Like, you know, everybody, at least if you're a wrestling fan, you want to be like the champion and you want to be a wrestler, but at the same time, like, I kind of enjoy doing the announcing and the broadcasting and things like that. And I think that might have been where I would have wanted to go and do something along those lines.
That's pretty cool. Let me get him off of me real quick. Sorry, he's scratching.
Bro.
Come here, bud.
No worries.
He's not scratching. He's just happy pawing. So the shirt is very thin. Like I don't normally have on a sweater or something to help with it, but not today.
Help with the claws.
Yeah, no kidding. So Conrad, what would you be doing?
Well, I like to think so. Like the metaphysical theories and everything, but I like to think that there are parallel universes where I am doing these other things, and this just happens to be the one where I'm doing this. But the ones I think most about are there'd be one where I ended up a psychiatrist, and I went more like the medical route. So that was all something like I played around with, like with doing. A different one, I would have followed psych a little bit differently based on what my dad always thought about me, is that he's like, oh, you're just going to be like a CIA analyst someday. And even then, I still think like it'd be more like probably like FBI behavioral analysis, because all that stuff is also interesting to me too. And then the other one would be totally branching off to the earlier part of life, and I didn't get sick at all. And I would be an Olympic water polo player.
Ooh. All right. Those are pretty cool things. Honestly, all of them are. So
Thanks.
we fortunately, after that imagination moment, now we get a magic moment. And so I have a magic wand here, and in a moment, as soon as I get it to turn on and light up the right way, I'm going to wave it, and you guys each get to eliminate one common opinion, misconception, or theory surrounding mental illness, disabilities, or talking about mental health. And you each get to choose, starting right now. Here's the magic wand, and there you go.
I have mine.
I think what I was going to say is I would just kind of like to eliminate the misconception of like getting help is weak. Because it's something Conrad even alluded to earlier. If you need aid, if you need help, that's admitting it and actually getting that help is stronger than saying that you don't need it and trying to suffer through it. I really think that there's, especially in and this goes for everybody too, but especially in men, there's this a big stigma of just suck it up, be a man about it, and it's hard for, and I think it's becoming a lot more commonplace now, but there's still a lot of that in society, and I would really love to see that go away, not just for guys, but everybody across the board. But I'd really like to see that stigma go away, and if somebody does need help and they need something, to go ahead and seek it and not feel like it's a weakness or a bad thing, or they're broken or defective, because we're all broken and defective. Sometimes it's just we just need some help figuring out how to piece ourselves back together.
Amen. That's the whole reason why I do this. So especially, it sounds weird for me, a woman, to say this, but especially the stigma around men seeking help is why I do this. Yeah. So
awesome.
Mine would be just because somebody looks okay doesn't mean they are okay. And I think that so much, and it can't really help it, that so much that we judge is just visual. And it's like, oh, well, that person looks fine, so they are fine. And most of the time, I think that that's not true. That, like, there's something going on. And whether that is, a mental illness or a physical illness, like, just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. And we rely so much on sight to take in information about other people, but really the exchange of information verbally is where we're going to get that. So I think that we need to just communicate better as a society, and as on the global level as well. I mean, just globally and within like our own country. And I think that that could really help with understand each other, but also just with helping each other. Because if everybody understood that just because you see something doesn't mean it's the way it is, then you get help more easily or want to help others more easily.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, I think those two tie together really well. I mean, somebody can look fine on the outside and really need to seek that help and not be seeking that help because there's a stigma against it, and others not recognizing it because they can't see it on the outside and they don't recognize the signs, or the other person isn't putting those signs out there because they're worried about putting them out there. So I think those are both really great things that I would love to eliminate, and we're working on that just by being here on Twitch doing this, and you guys doing what you do. So with that, I'll open up to any remaining community Q&A. I haven't seen anything else come through chat, but I'll also just throw it out to you guys and say if there's anything we didn't talk about, any resources you want to put out there. I will put your socials out one more time so that everybody has those. You can go connect, but I'll just turn it over to you guys. Anything you want to bring up?
Off the top of my head, I can't necessarily think of anything, but certainly thank you for having us come on tonight. This was great. Like you said, kind of talking about this is really what is going to erase those stigmas. So I know Conrad and myself, that's what we're here to do, and hopefully over time those stigmas go away.
I do want to bring up one thing that we did touch on briefly earlier. It's that everybody, no matter the quality, should be singing every day.
Absolutely. Listen, I'm gonna record that too and play it for my children so they can blame someone besides me, because they blame me for everything. So it's all good. But I absolutely agree. It's gotten to the point where my 7-year-old, so my go-to is singing Bright Eyes and making up my own lyrics, because I'm always telling my children, like, turn around, just like turn around. I need you to pay attention to me, look me in the eyes, turn around. So I always go to Bright Eyes. My 7-year-old the other day made up a song to the tune of Bright Eyes in the backseat of my car about wearing his dinosaur mask versus his COVID mask. And I was like, oh my God.
That's fantastic.
That's incredible.
That's awesome.
It was so funny, and I'm
constantly making.
Yes, yeah.
That's awesome. I'm constantly coming up with new lyrics to songs. Just stupid things that are going on throughout my day. I'm singing along to it, the tune of whatever's in my head.
Me too. So I think we're all on board with the singing, and it's great for you. And let's do it. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us here today. Chat, give me just a minute. I'm going to disconnect with our guests here, and then I will be right back. Bite Mark, if you're still around, can you shoot Dr. D and MDC a note real quick, like 10-minute warning, and then I'll be right back. So y'all give me just a minute, and thank you again for joining.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Take care, everybody.
And that's a wrap on today's episode of Even Tacos Fall Apart. We covered a lot of ground, from how tabletop role-playing games can offer a fresh perspective on yourself, to the importance of community, to the ways gaming can help us cope with the realities of chronic illness and mental health struggles. I think one of the biggest takeaways here is not about solving everything overnight. It's about finding small, meaningful ways to reframe how we approach the challenges life throws our way. Whether you're living with chronic illness or just dealing with the ups and downs of everyday life, we can all use tools that help us better understand ourselves and connect with others. Maybe that's through a game, maybe it's through talking to a friend, or maybe it's trying something completely new. The point is, finding those moments of reflection and connection can make a huge difference. If you're feeling inspired or curious about trying out tabletop role-playing games after hearing today's conversation, I encourage you to give it a shot. You don't need to be an expert or even have all the rules figured out. It's about the experience and what you can learn along the way. And it's not just about playing a game, it's about exploring new parts of yourself, finding and building community, and maybe even discovering a little bit of peace and a place for you to be in the process. Before we go, I would love for you to take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a review. Your feedback and that engagement really helps keep this show going and helps others find this place too. If today's episode resonated with you or you have thoughts you want to share, don't be shy. Drop a comment, send me a message on social media, or join our community where, by the way, we talk about games a whole hell of a lot. I'm always here to hear how these conversations land with you. Thanks so much for spending your time with me today. I really appreciate you being part of this journey. Until next time, remember, it's okay to fall apart. And even in those moments, you're still loved. Stay strong, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next episode.